All right. How's it growing, friends? Welcome to Office Hours, your source for free cannabis cultivation education. I'm Keisha, one of your co-moderators. What's up, Mandy?
Hey, Keisha, how's it going? We're here for episode 60. You guys know how we do it. We're going live over on YouTube. So if you're logging on over there, make sure you send me your questions and I'll get those over to our team. If you're active on social media, make sure you're following us on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Social Club. But let's get right into it. Back over to you, Keisha.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mandy. All right. If you're live with us here and you have a question, feel free to type it in the chat at any time. And if your question gets picked, we'll have you either unmute yourself or I can ask for you. We got Jason in the studio today. Jason, how you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. Spring's kicking in here.
Yes, I know. We've got some sunshine in Northern California. Finally, monsoon season might be over. But we have something very exciting we want to show folks today. Let's get into it. Our new VPD calculator is officially live.
Right on. Thanks for kicking us off. I'm going to share my screen here and we're going to take a look at the VPD calculator. So obviously, we've seen quite a few of these over the internet and we get asked fairly commonly, which one's best or what's a good link to it. Good link, vpd.aroya.io, and that's where this chart lives. So we've built this out and it looks fairly similar, a little bit refined to some of the charts you might get used to seeing. Some people use Excel sheets for them. This is nice and interactive. So all of these different areas represent good places to be. So this dark green is usually ideal VPD. And we've got some options over on the right side. First thing I'm going to do is turn it on to Fahrenheit because I'm not as used to using Celsius. And basically what we can do is we can either choose an area on the left side. So for me, if I wanted my temperature to be about 80 degrees, I could click into here and see that my ideal relative humidity would be about 72 degrees. And we can also change the slider on the right, and it's going to adjust either the y-axis or the x-axis or the offset based on the settings to the right. So as usual, I like to go for a target temperature and then set my humidity in the room according to VPD charts. And we've talked a lot of times about the ideal VPD for plants throughout their growing life cycle. And for cannabis, usually, during flower, we like to be between about 1 and 1.4. So typically during the start of flower, we'll be around that 1.0 range for VPD, and we'll start to dry things out a little bit towards the end of the flower and be up towards that 1.4. Maybe we have some questions on how this works or why it's important.
Yeah, let's talk about it in the broader, when it comes to crop steering. We do get a lot of questions about optimal VPD range. So yeah, how does this calculator help some of the cultivators who typically ask those questions?
Sure. So, let's start off the beginning of the cycle. Maybe we're shooting for a daytime temp of like 82 degrees. And so I'll go in here and select, let's say air temp 81.5. That's pretty close to 82. And for me, I kind of like to think of what's an acceptable range, because even in the best of the facilities, we're going to see some amount of swing and drift based on the set points and how well our HVAC can maintain those settings. So maybe in this case, I'd be like, yeah, during the daytime, I want to be between about 80 and 82 degrees or 83 degrees, depending on if I'm HPS or LEDs, we'll have a little bit different target ranges to start with, but keeping those temperatures nice and high, encouraging, nice metabolic rate in those plants. A little bit warmer temperatures are going to help them photosynthesize as fast as possible at the beginning. So in this case, it'd be like air temperature, kind of at about 80.6. And if I want to maintain a 1.0 VPD, we can see there across the top, my VPD with these settings would be about 1.03. So my air temps between 80 and 82, I'd want my relative humidity to be between 70 and, I'll shift this over and go to 82, 82.4. That's all right. And we can see I'm going to have to decrease my relative humidity just a little bit, 69%. And, keep in mind, these are rough numbers. If I'm trying to hit 1.0, well, 1.03 is really not very far off. So pretty easy just to, make those adjustments and use those temperatures. And then maybe we wanted to do a little bit later in flower and we wanted to induce a nighttime differential, encouraging something at the cyan and purpling color in the plant. And maybe we'd have a nighttime temp down to, like 76 degrees or 77 degrees. Let's go 77. Well, if I'm still shooting for that 1.0, maybe I'm going to be trying between 1.0 and 1.2 here. Maybe we're saying we're week 2 or 3. Then let's adjust that VP or that humidity and hit that relative humidity at 83 and air temperature at 77. And then if we go the other way for the high side, air relative humidity at 78, air temp at 77. And one thing to notice here is I haven't been adjusting my leaf temp. Make sure that you get that right as well. Here in a little bit, we'll discuss why leaf temperature is so important for VPD. We get questions all the time about, hey, how come we're not adjusting for leaf VPD? And really what it comes down to is we don't have a sensor right now that is providing those leaf temperature readings into AROYA. A leaf temperature is not a super easy reading to acquire as far as accurately addressing what the entire plant population, the spatial differences lower in the canopy can affect. So as far as leaf temperature, a lot of times if I don't know it, I'll just kind of keep it set pretty close to what my air temp is and go from there. If you do have an infrared thermometer or best yet, thermal imaging camera, then get an idea of what your average leaf temp is and use that for a leaf vapor pressure deficit. Obviously, some of the things that impact how the plant is feeling as far as a leaf VPD is it's going to be temperature of your irrigation, going to be amount of airflow, and it's going to be most importantly the temperature of the room. And so the reason that we're usually talking about the temperature reading from the Atmos 14, their climate station, is because that's the information that you can capture. And it's also the VPD that's going to affect your leaf temperature, VPD, the absolute most. So it's like, hey, here's an optimal variable. Here's the controlling variable. Let's take a look at the controlling variable so that we can achieve what the optimal variable needs to be at.
This is an awesome tool, and it looks great. I can't wait to play around with this myself. We are getting some comments over on YouTube. Iron Armor wrote in, "Let's go, VPD calculator looking awesome. How can I account for the leaf surface temperatures now, though?"
Well, I guess this is a good time to segue into some of the work that I have done in the past during my time as a cultivator, and I'll just bring up, the easy question. Get yourself a thermal camera. It's going to be by far the most efficient way to use your time valuably. If you go in infrared thermometer, yeah, that's great. But what you're doing is taking a lot of very small spot readings. And realistically, you need to be taking a pretty large number of those to get a good idea. Thermal camera is going to get you a full picture of what you're trying to deal with. And I'll just bring up some of that imagery that I've done in the past to get an idea of what is leaf surface temperature, what does it look like across the plants. And in this case, I was using a FLIR. Thermal imaging cameras can be fairly expensive, anywhere from $200 for a very low quality one to up to maybe 10 grand or above if you want a high quality one. In most cases, it's going to be about the resolution of that camera. In this case, this is fairly low resolution, as you can see. Those cheaper ones are going to be like 60 by 80 pixels. And so that's the number of infrared dots that it's showing on the screen. Obviously, the higher the resolution in one of these cameras is going to present a more clear picture. But that being said, this is obviously something that we can't see with our eyes. And so this tool is providing me an idea of what is the range of these temperatures across my canopy, across my plant, etc. In this case, we're looking directly at the bud. And the bud is not the flower. The flower is not transpiring nearly as much as the leaves are. And we can see here at the top of the canopy, our leaves are the warmest, where the solar radiation from our lights, from the sunshine in this case, because this was a mixed light greenhouse, is heating up those leaves more. Down in the canopy, we've got plants that are, or leaves that are still transpiring, yet not getting as much solar radiation. So they're cooler. Here's kind of a side shot. I really like this one because we get to see the outlines. It's almost looks like it's photo edited, but this is a non-edited representation from that thermal imaging. And in this case, we can see, all right, my point measurement here is at 68.2, and my range of temperatures in this picture is 67 to 74.3. So in this case, the black spots down here are at about 67 degrees Fahrenheit, and some of these flowers are up into 74.3. And this rolls directly into why is leaf temperature a little bit hard to capture? Because obviously in this picture, I have a range of 7.3 degrees difference. And how many spot measurements with an infrared camera would I need to take in order to accommodate for that variation? And obviously, good growers are going to do their best to get as many measurements and kind of get a sample curve and understand, all right, where is my mean of that data set that I'm pulling? And in this case, obviously we're getting hundreds of pixels, hundreds of thermal readings in one shot. So I definitely recommend them. I can guarantee that you're going to learn something about your garden and your facility probably within the first few days of having one and using that imaging in the facility. So one of the cool things as well is a lot of these will take 2 pictures. So it'll take a typical camera picture at the exact same time that it takes a thermal picture. And so you can see on the left side, this is what the human eye is observing. This is obviously what we're used to taking a picture of. And I don't know the different leaf temperatures in that picture. But on the right side, it gets a good idea of how much variance there is against my canopy. And through my pictures here, you can get an idea of how different angles, different shots, going in deep into the canopy, taking them from a raised position is going to affect how much you're capturing in that picture and what your leaf temperature is. Another challenging thing here is, I'm looking at uniformity. I like to use 2 words. We have uniformity and consistency. And for me, uniformity is a snapshot in time. Right now, what's the difference across my canopy or my room as far as variables go? Temperatures, how well my plants are drinking. All right, this one over here is drinking great. This one's not drinking good. My consistency needs improvement. Or excuse me, my uniformity needs improvement. And then when I talk about consistency, that is over time. And so with something like an Atmos 14, we can look at our consistency over time. Sure, it's still a point measurement, so we only have one snapshot of uniformity in that room. Hopefully, if you're in larger rooms, you have more climate stations in there. You can get an idea of what your uniformity is. And uniformity usually is based on how much airflow do I have, what are the locations of my HVAC units, those types of things. And then consistency is how are they operating over time, right? And so when we're looking at a VPD measurement from our climate station, we're looking at what does the consistency look like? All right, right now, are we in check with where we want to be on our VPD in 5 minutes? Are we at that same check? Are we within our limits? 5 minutes later, 5 minutes later, and our data intervals are actually 3 minutes. So that's what I should have said. But in this case, we're looking at only a snapshot of uniformity. So taking these thermal images across the different time frames in the grow cycle is also a great practice. What does my leaf temps look like before I'm producing flower? And then what do my leaf temps look like at the very end of flower? And even on a smaller picture, we can think about, all right, what do my leaf temps look like in relationship to my irrigations? What do my leaf temps look like before my plants start transpiring, right after lights on, before photosynthesis is fully engaged? Those are just a lot of the variables to think about when we start incorporating measurements like leaf temperature.
Jason, these pictures are amazing. They're just really cool. There's a whole universe in that plant. It's really wonderful to see. Also, what I'm hearing is like, you're really emphasizing the importance of crop registration. Like if you don't know some benchmarks and some values from what you're doing, the VPD calculator can't really like support you that well.
Yeah. When you think about, there's an old saying, garbage in, garbage out. And our VPD calculator is just the same. If some of the information that you're putting in there isn't relative to what's actually going on, then you may have some challenges setting that temperature or humidity correctly for that environment.
I got another question for you, and we've had this asked before, but do you have are there any particular brand or models that you recommend for taking leaf temperature?
I've only worked with FLIR, and they've been a long-standing industry leader with them. Fluke makes lots of thermal imaging units. I think there's a company called Seek that lets you plug them into your phone and use them. There's definitely a couple newer ones out there as well. In this case, I took this from up on top of a ladder, and we can see how cool the floor, that concrete floor, is. Especially right here where we've got some water that's sitting on the floor. That water is evaporating and providing evaporating cool to that concrete surface. And so it's by far the coolest spot in here where we can see it's black. And then down in on the canopy, we get to see yet again those colas, and deeper into the canopy a little bit cooler temperatures. So something like this would be a great way, because I'm shooting about the median color of that area, and we could see, hey, I'm at about 69.3 degrees. Oops. With highs of about 74 over on the right side and lows at 67. So we could be like, all right, let's shoot for the median number as our leaf surface temperature that we want to use in our VPD chart. So in this case, I'd be like, let's use right about 70 degrees, maybe 71 degrees. And I only had to take one sample to make that judgment. So rather than spending your time using infrared measurements, which there are some relatively inexpensive infrared radiometers, handheld radiometers, and there's a massive difference in quality on those. It's kind of like the hygrometers that we see. A lot of those, sub $50 hygrometers that we're so used to walking into a grow room and looking at the temperature and the relative humidity and then the highs and lows. A lot of those are working off of a range of plus or minus 7 degree temperature and plus or minus up to 10 degrees relative humidity is what I've seen on some of those specs. And that accuracy just doesn't help you make good choices for what the plant feels. And this one's kind of cool. I think one of my other favorite parts of this I've always wanted to do some work with is when we're looking down here, we can basically count the colas, and we can see the grid as well. So we know how many colas per square inch that we have popping up through our canopy here. And I'll roll through the rest of these fairly quick until I see something I want to talk about. This is a side shot. This was in some well overgrown moms. Kind of fun just to see, hey, when we get even deeper in the canopy away from the aisle or close to the wall, we have even cooler, probably less airflow, less radiation hitting the plants down in there. On top of what you can do with leaf surface temperature on thermal imaging, it's just a good piece of equipment to have, because we can start looking at how our drippers work, how well our fans are working. Do we have equipment that's starting to overheat? Just checking on maintenance, facility operations type of stuff that we can't necessarily evaluate very easily just as a human being. So in this case, we can see, the top of those pots are a lot warmer just from some solar hitting them. This was one of the mom pots, same kind of thing, some solar radiation hitting the top of the pot here. It's definitely warmer, probably because it's a little bit drier towards the top of the pot. Here on the outside, we can see it might be cooler down here as the bottom, just because we have some evaporation coming out of the side of this net pot. As I mentioned, things like, drippers. In this case, this is a really easy red flag that dripper on my right. Hopefully it's your guys' right. The one with the much smaller cool spot. So this was actually right while we were irrigating. And in this case, we can see that the irrigation water was probably about 63 degrees, 62, 63 degrees coming in. And here by this stake, we've got a pretty big spread out, a pretty big gradient of that cooler water. We can see that, hey, the cool water's coming in and it's reducing the temperature in that. On this one, we can see that there's not a lot of cool water coming in, and that was a clogged emitter. Pretty easy to find just by walking around scanning it and fixing those up. Kind of a fun picture here as well. I did want to point out the temperature of this fan on the wall. The fans they're a liability if they get too hot and start to fail. So, keep an eye across the room. Hey, do we have some really old fans that are getting hotter? Have we changed models and some of them are running beyond the ranges that we want to? Do we need to just clean those out to make sure they're getting good airflow through the motors? All those are things to kind of think about beyond just the plant. Obviously, the better the facility can operate, the better that we can grow. And here's another. This was an exhaust fan in a greenhouse, and right here just below the fan, we can actually see the motor. It's this bright yellow spot right here, about 90 degrees. And we can see the belt going up to drive that fan. And we can see, hey, right around the fan, we've got pretty cool temperatures pushing out. So just a good reason to invest in some equipment like this. So didn't want to get us too distracted from the VPD chart, but I know that we get lots of questions about leaf surface temperature, and wanted to get the real answer out there as far as, yes, you absolutely should be taking that into consideration. Getting a great measurement of your leaf surface temperature isn't necessarily as easy and fast as getting it from your air. And you can also change your leaf surface temperature by utilizing the air VPD. So get an idea of, what your target leaf surface temperature, leaf surface VPDs are, and, set your HVAC systems based on the VPD readings that you're getting out of AROYA for the air to achieve those appropriate VPDs around the plant.
Wow, there it is. That is an amazing overview. Thank you so much for that, Jason. And just a reminder to anybody who joined us a little late, our VPD calculator is now live. You can find it at vpd.aroya.io. I'll drop the link again into the chat. But I mean, wow, talk about a crash course. Okay, I think we're going to move on to some live questions. And then Mandy, it looks like there's quite a bit of action happening over on YouTube, yeah?
Yeah, so we sent you guys a poll, but I do want to get back to Iron Armor. He said, nice, definitely need to pick up a thermal imaging camera for the garden. Yeah, we do recommend it. And then over to that poll. So we asked y'all, where are you watching from today? So what part of the world? We asked West Coast, East Coast, or other. 33% are watching from the West Coast, 17% from the East Coast, and 50% from other. So I think that's other continents, other countries. That's really cool. Thanks, you guys. And then moving on to some of our questions. So we got a question over on YouTube. Do you notice that plants with soil sensors dry back faster and yield higher?
That's an interesting question. So physically, the soil sensor is not going to change how fast that plant dries back. Now, if you're optimizing the conditions for the readings that you're getting from that plant, it might absolutely operate to the best performance. So, anything that we're monitoring, we can improve. And I've ran into a number of clients that back in the day were using really expensive substrate sensors, and maybe they just have one substrate sensor per room, and they'd come back and tell me, hey, that plant grew great, and the rest of the room was not as good. It was not very good, right? And so what was happening was the irrigation and fertilization strategies they were employing were specifically for the information that they were getting from that one sample. And as I've done in the past with some growth behavior, population statistics, I think we still have that video up on YouTube as well. We got to get enough information to make the best decision for all these plants. So simple answer is could be. Is it because we're growing specifically tailored to that plant? But physically, the sensor's not doing anything to change the plant's growth.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Tyler Bass wrote in, what's the correlation between substrate EC and runoff EC? I find runoff to be about twice as high as my substrate EC when I push runoff. And then they gave us some numbers here, 2.8 EC feed, 3.5 substrate EC, and 6.5 runoff EC.
That's a great question. It's going to be a very dynamic relationship. It's going to be based on what the media that you're using, the cation exchange capacity of that media is basically going to dictate some of that information. How much runoff are you pushing? Are your ECs above or below what the plant is eating? And so too many scenarios to give a great answer on that. One scenario might be, let's say that our substrate EC is at 6 and maybe our feed EC is at 3.0. Well, typically when we do get original runoff, we're going to see some of that built up EC get pushed out of the substrate. So it might be a little bit higher. Now, if we continue to run off, typically that's going to drop both the substrate and the runoff EC lower towards our feed EC. And this is kind of one of the things that, when we look at growing 15 years ago and maybe we didn't have as good as nutrients, pretty much everyone was pushing runoff. And that's because we were trying to reset the nutrient balance in the substrate and make sure that we had an EC that was close to our feed EC. Obviously, now that we have a little bit better technology and some nutrients tailored towards cannabis growth, we can save some nutrients in our feed. We can decrease our runoff and let those plants use up that substrate or use up those nutrients in that substrate. I always usually like to get enough runoff that I can keep in check my pH, just in case we do start to see an imbalance in nutrient composition in our substrate. And that'll give you an idea on, hey, maybe a deficiency or an excess nutrient is occurring.
Awesome. Thank you for that. That is it for over on YouTube for now. So I will pass it back to you, Keisha.
Cool. Thank you, Mandy. All right. Well, on the topic of EC, we actually had Jacob posted a question on YouTube recently, writing, what pour water EC are you targeting for the first 3 to 4 week gen steer, the next 3 week veg steer, and the last couple weeks gen steer?
So, we get these questions all the time. First off is strain preferences. Certain genetics are going to eat way harder than others. They'll perform better at much higher ECs and vice versa. Some strains get really picky when we feed them too hard with nutrients. That being said, another thing to kind of think about is what time and relationship are we looking at pour water EC in comparison to our irrigations? Are we at the end of the dryback where our EC is typically going to be the highest? Are we right after our irrigations when we typically see EC to be the lowest? So usually when we're pushing generative, we're going to have a pretty significant dynamic from those two time frames, those captures of EC. This is really why time series monitoring of EC is so critical, so we can start to see the behavior and we get to know the daily low and high of those EC levels. And so for generative, maybe on a well-fed plant that is being steered aggressively, you might see ECs in the 7 to 12 or 15 range, from after irrigation to dry back, maybe even higher if you're pushing really hard. You have big plants. Maybe you don't see them quite that high. It just comes down to how aggressively do we want to steer? Are our plants healthy enough? Is everything else balanced to push them that hard? And what does that genetic prefer? And those are all information that, you have to do run after run to get acquainted with what your strains look like when you do these types of techniques. And taking that information and getting it all into one system where you can start to look at strain run analytics and cultivar profiles, that's how you start to make better decisions, is being able to save it enough times that you know where to go with it. Obviously, with the amount of turnover on strains in the industry right now, it is tricky. We've had, I think Ellie was talking just the other week about how she likes to run a strain at least 3 times to get an idea of what it's going to produce before they decide to keep it or cut it. If we want to just keep going through the time frames, I'm happy to say, for vegetative bulking, middle of the flower cycle, usually ECs between say 5 and 8 is a good range in there. And then ripening, ECs are going to get pretty wild as we push big dry backs, have big plants and start to ripen up. So I usually don't pay too much attention to EC during ripening, as long as I'm not dropping it out too much and starving those plants. So that means that we are going to keep a good amount of nutrients in there, at very minimum, half strength nutrients, 3/4 nutrients. Even preferred is reducing the nitrogen amounts in your feed and move into different forms of calcium intake.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Jason. Yeah, I love when people ask that question, because it is an opportunity for us to remind them, like, you got to be tracking all your harvests. You got to be logging all that data. And then that's what gives you really your target ranges by cultivar. So, and AROYA can help you with that. Awesome. All right. We're going to keep it moving. This question came in, I think it was last week, but we didn't have a chance to get to it. And I think it's a good one to talk about, considering the overview you just gave. Andrew wrote in, should I change my sensor placement throughout the growth cycle to different plants of the same strain to get more accurate data?
I usually tried not to. The only time that I'll move a sensor is if I'm getting some really weird readings from it. It might be indicating that, there's an air pocket in that substrate. I was just talking with a client today. It had some chunkier cocoa. And, my guess is that, hey, every once in a while it's hitting a chunkier piece of cocoa when we're getting it inserted, and it might be creating a little bit of a cavity. And a lot of times we'll just see with those cavities is either we get drier readings than we want or wetter readings than we're used to getting. And that sensor reads the volume of influence that's around it. The more consistent that substrate is, the easier it is to get uniform readings out of your AROYA system. Like rockwool, for example, most of the time when we're working with rockwool and it has a uniform wet up, it's going to be a little bit better readings than we would get out of a natural substance like cocoa. And yeah, I know rockwool is it is stone. It's blown stone, so it's natural as well. I just kind of meant in composition as well. And cocoa, like when it gets compressed, that does help the consistency throughout the pot. But those are always going to be variations that we have to get used to. So, I'll go in and make sure that the sensor is at the right height. Make sure that it is flush with the media. If you're using hard round pots, make sure you cut out a rectangle that's large enough for the sensor body to sit completely flat with the substrate, with the media that's inside of that pot. Any of the prongs that is exposed to air are going to cause drier readings, higher ECs typically. And so, that sensor installation, absolutely critical in evaluating whether the variation is actual or not, whether the variation is something the plant's going to feel. If installation looks good, check out your drippers. And if everything else looks good, then maybe, go ahead and try it in the other side of the substrate or move it on to a different plant. But in general, I like to keep my sensors in the same plants throughout the cycle. I like to get a little bit of variation as far as spatially how they're in the room, make sure I'm getting ones that are a little bit towards the corner, towards the aisle, maybe towards the center of the canopy as well. And that's going to help get you a full picture of how much differently your plants are operating in there.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jason. And Andy, I think we have a question on YouTube. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks you guys for all your comments over on YouTube. We had a question come in about sensor placement. Where do you place sensors in bulk or flower in general? 2 or 3 inches from the bottom or higher?
in bulk or flower general? Sorry, can you get one more time? I'm trying to understand what they're asking here.
Yeah. Where do you place sensors in bulk or flower in general? 2 or 3 inches from the bottom or higher?
I'm not sure what in bulk or flower in general means, but we do provide sensor placement tools with any of the AROYA systems. They're going to have the different markings at the different heights in the substrate, depending on what size they are. For 1 gallons, we're at inch and a quarter. And I'd have to look up the rest of the exact heights. So yeah, let us know what size substrate, what kind of substrate you're working off of. Thanks, Mandy, for showing that. I was going to go run over to my tool bag there and grab one, but you got us handled here. Yeah, let us know what size substrate you're working with, and we can either read off from our template or give you a rough idea on what you should be doing.
Yeah. Let us know what you guys are working with, and we can give you some more information. We actually just got another question over on YouTube. Tyler wants to know, when drying back heavy, would you expect the substrate EC sensor to read 6+ at the end of dry back? I find my substrate EC never goes up 5, even when I get 8 or 9 EC runoff.
So, yep, most of the time, EC does climb when our water content starts to go. So, and this is why I talk about not getting too overwhelmed about high ECs, at the very end of dry back. A lot of times it rises way up. If it's not rising up, sometimes we just have a really hungry strain, and we may not be seeing nearly that increase that we do. So sometimes that can be an indicator of a little bit lower feed EC. That means that maybe you want to up your feed EC, get those plants at least as much nutrients as they're eating from the substrate.
And he did come back with some clarification. Can't tell if I'm underfeeding. Sensor is reading low or something else. I'm in cocoa, peat, perlite mix.
Yeah. So obviously, kind of like we were just talking about, check sensor installation, take a look at some of those runoff values. You seeing any purpling in the stems, any types of deficiencies that plant might be expressing, and then evaluate what your feed EC should be.
Awesome. Thanks for that. And we did have our original question about where to place sensors in bulk or flower in general. They came back, they're in 1 gallon cocoa pots. So I'm looking on here, how far you should place it in slabs, 3 6-inch blocks.
Inch and a quarter.
Jason, I'm sorry, go ahead, Jason.
Should be 1 and a quarter from the bottom of the cocoa bag.
1 and a quarter.
So it's that bottom slot.
Yep, you're totally right. Thank you for that. But yeah, let us know if you need a sensor alignment tool, and we can get that out to you too. We got more questions coming in. Greg wants to know, do you need high EC to grow good cannabis? My decades of experience tell me high EC equals bud that smokes like coal.
Nice. Like coal. I haven't been smoking much coal lately, so I like that analogy. But I think it's going to come down to what is in your nutrients at the time. So this is that age-old white ash versus black ash kind of thing that we hear come up quite a bit. And really, it's the idea that we need to probably reduce some of the carbohydrate load in the plant later in flower. So during ripening, historically, a lot of people have done that by removing all the nutrients from the feed at the end of the cycle. And obviously, one of my least favorite terms, flushing, is what people will be doing to try and get the carbohydrates out there. Providing no nutrients to the plant to reduce how much carbohydrates are in there. Well, we're also reducing the other chemical compositions that allow the plant to fully mature its terpene profiles, to finish off its last bit of THC that it's building out. And this is a point when our plants are pretty hungry still. They're very large plants, and any of our starving plants can develop necrotic bud sites in there, which are much more susceptible to molds and mildews. And so, the longer that we don't feed them, the bigger liability of loss due to bacterial growth in there. And, we see a lot of nutrient companies coming on as well with some ripening supplements where you're dropping out one of your 2 parts of nutrients and supplementing it with a lower nitrogen replacement. That's really in goals to kind of reduce the amount of carbohydrates that are available and push for the white smoke. So to answer your question, I think that a higher EC can definitely initiate flower set earlier on, and a little bit higher EC a lot of times can keep you getting rock hard buds, bigger A to B ratios. And that being said, when we say higher, I mean the right amount of EC. So great question. Love it.
Yeah, really great question. I do want to go back to the earlier question about sensor placement. They came back with, when I said bulk, I didn't know if there were different placements in different stages or if you leave it in the same spot all throughout flower. Do you have any feedback for that?
Same spot.
Boom. Quick and easy. Thank you for that. I think that's it for over on YouTube for now. So I'll pass it back to Keisha.
Thank you, Mandy. Yeah, great questions today, y'all. Thank you so much for your activity. And we've got about 19 minutes left in the show. So if you have any questions for Jason today, now's the time to ask. We got this question in a while back, just didn't have time to get to it. And you were speaking about cocoa a little earlier, Jason, but they posted a question. Can you talk about the pros and cons of cocoa slabs? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, cocoa slabs. Unfortunately, I haven't yet grown in cocoa slabs. So they're going to share the same advantages, from a single substrate to a slab, just like Rockwell, where, if we do lose a dripper on one of those 3 plants, at least we have 5 more drippers to make up for it. That shared substrate a lot of times is a little bit easier to manage just because now we're accounting for the variability in 3 plants rather than just from plant to plant to plant. So I do like slabs just because when we're sharing that root zone, it's easier for an average to be made, if you will. It's already incorporating the growth of 3 plants. So maybe 2 of those plants are growing great and one of them's not. Well, that one that's not, that information is going to be slightly buffered by the ones that are. And so anytime that those are in a shared substrate, we're probably a little bit more likely to have some uniformity in the room, and our sensor data might be easier to interpret.
That's good to know. Thank you. That was a great question. Yeah.
A couple other things just in general about slabs is a lot of times they are a little bit easier to wet up simply because we can use our irrigation systems. We let that bag to fill and then we'll cut the slits in. So rather than having to make sure we're doing a dunk, we can typically do it with our drip systems, leave it overnight to soak up and then start draining those bags. So that's an advantage. Another advantage, probably a little bit less evaporation than we see from open top substrates. So since the bag is fully enclosed and the only amount that's exposed is where we've put starter block on top of, typically a little bit less evaporation going on.
Awesome, Jason. Thank you for that. Mandy, I think we've got some responses to this particular question from YouTube. Yeah.
Yeah. Tyler wrote in, Nutrient Label has a recommended mix rate that gives me a 2.4 EC. If I have high CO2, 1200 plus ppfd, 84 degree temps, would the 2.4 EC recommendation be low? And should I consider running 3 or 3.5?
Yeah. So another good thing to include there, is light levels. If we're at 1200 ppm for CO2, we'll definitely, as long as the plants are of age, we'll want to be running 900 plus micromoles ppfd. I would absolutely consider running a higher EC. If you're in HPS, a lot of times we like to be around 3. For LEDs, usually 3.5 plus is kind of the base that we go for in flowers. So I would absolutely consider it. Easiest way to know is start logging data and see, how much your EC is rising, and keep in mind, how much runoff are we pushing, and use that to evaluate whether those plants would do better with a bit more concentration.
Thank you for that. Greg had a couple of comments over on YouTube. Cocoa slabs in Hawaii did not work as well as our black cinder lava rock on most. And then they came back. EC does go through the roof with extreme drybacks. So interesting. I love hearing about how we're growing in different parts of the world. I think that's it over on YouTube right now. So I'll pass it back to you, Keisha.
Growing cannabis in lava rock. What? I love that. That's amazing. Okay. Nox Tromox left a comment on our YouTube, and they want to know what you think about schwazzing technique. I had to look it up. According to Advanced Nutrients, schwazzing involves stripping all cannabis fan leaves beneath the top 2 or 3 nodes at 2 key times, once at the start of the bloom phase and again at the beginning of the 3rd week of bloom. So thoughts on that, Jason?
So usually I like to be on the side of a little bit less aggressive pruning or de-leafing on those plants. I mean, it is a fine line when we think about, what's the plant's response to this and what are our goals when we're doing it. Are the other ways that I like to evaluate how much of the fan leaves that I'm pulling off. So, really the goals are to increase the uniformity as far as environment goes. So that's keeping good airflow throughout the canopy, making sure that it's eliminating some of the microenvironments that are around those leaves that will modify how it grows. And then also, allowing more light penetration into lower buds. What it does for the plant, obviously, these plants have a lot more leaves than they absolutely need to photosynthesize at the rates that they can, but we don't want to strip more more leaves than are providing the needed photosynthesis, because then we're going to slow down the rate of growth of that plant. And so, really the fine balance comes into, what is our plant spacing? What's the morphology of the plants? So the shape, the width, how much spacing how much room are they taking up? How much labor do we have? How much extra money do we have to put into labor to do those managing things? And then just making sure you don't overdo it. When de-leafing at the right amounts, a lot of times it can actually encourage bud growth. Some plants have a predatory response where, if a little bit of leaves are taken, they'll actually push their energy into bud growth. But if too much leaves are taken, then this plant knows that it needs to rebuild infrastructure in order to capture enough light that it needs to mature. And so in that case, it's going to be in a regenerative type of response in which it's actually producing a vegetative response, pushing energy towards leaves to try and capture some more light.
Jason, you just gave me some really good info as I'm preparing for my next home grow. So I think I didn't de-leaf properly last year.
Did you take pictures?
No. I know. I will this year. I know. I got to do better. I
I mean to call you out.
That's okay.
We're all living and
right
learning.
this year, y'all. All right. Over to you, Mandy.
Was it still smokable though? At least, come on.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
At least there's that. Okay. Yes. Well, that's good. Well, Iron Armor came back. Since we're on the topic of white ass, oh my gosh, cut that. You guys, it's been a long week. All right, start again. Iron Armor, great question that you just wrote in over on YouTube. Since we're on the topic of white ash versus charcoal briskets, does the drying process play any role in that at all?
It probably does a little bit. I think that, the chemical composition is going to be adjusted by how long that we dry it. If we dry it way too fast, we're not allowing the chlorophylls in the plant to break down. So quick answer, yes.
Awesome. Thank you guys for that. I'm going to pass it back to you, Keisha.
Fantastic. Mandy, y'all would be dying if you knew all the activity was going on over here with the word schwazzing. We're having a great time with it. It's fun to learn a new word. We love vocabulary. All right. We got this question in from Sir Onstel. They would like to, they were asking about the pre-harvest period. What moisture content is appropriate before chop on harvest?
Yeah. So pre-harvest, also what we like to call ripening. Typically anywhere between 7 days to 2 weeks before the end of harvest. And water content, usually we're pushing a more generative irrigation schedule. So, we'll be hitting field capacity. Let's use Rockwell as an example. We'll be hitting field capacity at say 65, 70% volumetric water content. And we'll let us go for a pretty long 22, 23 hour dry back window. And a lot of times then at the bottom there. So if we were at 70, a 25% dry back would be pushing us down there at 45%. So those would be kind of the windows that I'm using. If you're in a little bit smaller media, say a 1 gallon, you might be up in the 30% dry back amount. So you'd be say 70 to 40%. And then, it's things like cocoa, you're going to have a little bit lower field capacity. Typically we'll see between 45 and 65% for most cocos. Usually the finer cocoa has a little bit higher holding capacity than the chunky stuff. So sometimes with that chunky stuff, you got to get a few more irrigations in there, push a couple of P2s just because you're at the low water content at field capacity. And if you push a really heavy dry back, you're going to start to do just a tad bit of irrigation stressors when we get down below, say 20% volumetric water content, 25. It really just depends on the manufacturer and the composition of that cocoa.
Be mindful of the chunky stuff, y'all. All right. Over to you, Mandy.
Awesome. Thanks for that. We're getting a couple comments over on YouTube. So Desmood, you've given us a lot of great questions today, and they wrote back, my first time watching, and this information is incredible. This guy knows his stuff. Thank you guys for that. And then Greg McAllister came back. This is a person growing in Hawaii. So Northern Light Seeds, so they quoted some years here, has been using lava rock for decades, red rock in Washington State, tan in Oregon, and here in Hawaii, growers have been using our black cinders for many decades, but they came back with some prices for that. So black cinder in Hawaii is $1,100 for 32 cubic yards. Any comments on that?
I want to grow in Hawaii.
Yeah.
Yeah. How about out?
I want to consume that in Hawaii. That sounds amazing.
Yeah. Let us know how the environment helps growing out there. But thank you guys for all of the comments over on YouTube. And that is it for a second. So I'll pass it back to you, Keisha.
Awesome. Thank you, Mandy. All right, y'all, we got about 8 minutes left in the program. So if you have any questions, be sure to drop them in your respective chats. We got this right in from Carlos a while back. They saw a short video of us talking about crop steering in deep water culture. It was only about a minute. It was on Instagram. I'm new to growing cannabis in Thailand, and I have some experience in DWC before. I'm not very good at soil. So I was wondering, is it possible to crop steer in DWC, manipulating EC, since in DWC you can't really do drybacks right?
I love this question because I don't know the right answer. And usually what I like to think about is just how the science breaks it down in relationship to the plant. So when we're looking at deep water culture, obviously we can manipulate the EC. We don't have a lot of abilities to adjust how much water that plant has access to. In something like aeroponics, we could change our misting frequency or duration to try and fluctuate the plant's response to water a little bit. But in deep water culture, absolutely using EC. In substrates like cocoa and rockwool, osmotic differentials, increasing or decreasing the osmotic potential between the plant and its nutrient supplying source, whether that be straight fertigation water or a substrate, does make an effect. So I would give it a shot.
Yeah, and Carlos, keep us posted if you decide to experiment a little bit over there. Let us know how it goes, because anything that, crop steering, being able to make those decisions to help you grow better would be awesome. Okay. Mandy, you got some YouTube action?
Yeah, thank you guys for your questions. So Greg came back. Organic lava rock adds bio. Oh my gosh, there's so much information here. I'm sorry. I'm going to start with this question first, just so we can make sure we get through it. Tyler wants to know, when you talk about a 50% dry back for gin and 30% for veg, if field capacity is 60%, would a gin dry back be 30% volumetric water content and roughly 42% for veg? Sorry, I'll drop that in the chat too.
I just want to clarify, like when we talk about dry back amounts, that's the amount of volumetric water content. So, it's not a percentage of, how much water is in there at the time. It's an actual value of the total volume of the substrate. So like it says, for rockwool, a lot of times will be 65 to 75% for field capacity. If we are pushing for, let's say an aggressive generative dry back, that'd be like 30%. So we'd be at, 70% before our dry back, and we'd be at 40% volumetric water content after the dry back. So right before the irrigation, we'll do our P1s, get up to field capacity, and we'll be back there at that 70%. So, for generative, usually like 30% would be a fairly aggressive. So depending on the size of the media, this is going to be different. If we're in smaller medias, it's going to obviously be a larger number. If we're in smaller medias, it's going to be all we can do, or excuse me, if we're in larger medias, it's going to be all we can do to get up to say, 20% on a dry back, if we're in like a 3-gallon cocoa pot. And for veg, a lot of times we'll be looking more like 10, 15 if we're in a very large media, and in the range of probably 15 to a little bit over 20 if we're in a appropriate sized media.
Awesome. Thanks for clarifying that. Yeah, that's it for over on YouTube. Back over to you, Keisha, with our Instagram questions.
Thank you, Mandy. Yeah, we got this one a while back from Dave Ray. We hadn't gotten to it before today. Dave Ray was wondering, any idea on the rough calculation on wet versus dry weight for the entire plant? Like if I cut down the whole plant and weigh, what's the approximate weight percentage loss to end at dry flower only weight?
It's going to depend on the strain and how well it was grown. I've seen numbers as low as 12%, and I've seen numbers as high as 22%. And so 100% is going to depend on how much bud. I would say if we have more bud, then that's going to be a higher percentage because that's accounting for more weight than stalks and stems. If you've got a plant that is short and loaded with colas, yet again, a higher percentage. If we're a big stocky plant and maybe we got some more larfier stuff on there, then it's going to be a lower percentage. So, exact numbers, too many variables in here for me to give you a great idea.
Yeah. No, for real. Thank you for that, Jason. And yeah, Dave Ray, like if you've got a little bit more insight you can share with us, let's go a little bit deeper, maybe on another episode. Okay. All right, folks, we got like 2 minutes left. I'm going to ask this question. Okay, real quick. And I think I already know the answer to this, but Humboldt High Club wanted to know what tech we recommend on a soil setup. Any thoughts on that?
What tech?
Yeah.
Best tech?
Yeah.
Use the best tech. For soil setups, it's going to depend on what size of soil beds that you're working with. Sometimes it's a little bit easier to use spray emitters on the soil beds. If you can have a little bit of drainage down in the bottom, maybe you want some gravel down towards the bottom to help that stuff not build up a boundary layer of water, a water table at the bottom. That's going to help you just make sure that it is getting good aeration, that your flow through of water's bringing some oxygen with it. Other stuff, usual HVAC setups, or if it's a greenhouse, usual mixed light setups. Make sure you're logging as much as you can from there. Make sure that you're using a high quality substrate. So your soil needs to be obviously healthy If you're using it time over time, make sure you're sending out for soil samples and getting amendments that help build the health of your soil. Lots of things you can do. When we talk about the technology, really, when we look at something like rock wool, we're simplifying as many elements as we can. We know exactly what's in that media most every time. When we start to play with things like soil, their composition is changing over time. The chemical makeup of what's in that soil is consistently being modified by the microbes that are growing in it, and so it's much more difficult to know exactly what are we working with without getting soil samples and having a great understanding of what your amendments do and how long it takes for those natural supplements to break down the soil into food for the plant.
Yeah. So I feel like the best tech is the tech that helps you get the job done best. How's that for a wrap up? Amazing. Jason, thank you so much for holding it down. Really appreciate you. Great session. Excellent questions. Thanks to everybody who submitted them. Mandy, thank you for holding down YouTube. And Chris, thank you for holding down production in the back. Thanks for everybody who joined today, AROYA Office Hours. We do this every Thursday, and the best way to get answers from the experts is to join us live. If you'd like to learn more about AROYA, feel free to book a demo with us, and one of our experts would be happy to walk you through all the different ways this production platform, cannabis platform, can help improve your production process. As always, let us know if there's a topic you'd like covered on a future episode of Office Hours. You can post questions anytime via the AROYA app. Feel free to drop us a message in the chat, send us an email at support.aroya@metergroup.com, send us a DM. We are on all the socials, and we definitely want to hear from you. We record every session. We will email everyone in attendance a link to the video from today's discussion. It'll also live on the AROYA YouTube channel. Like, subscribe, and share while you're there. And if you find these conversations helpful, please do spread the word. Thanks so much, y'all. We'll see you next time. Bye.